Hello, I'm Bob Jacob, Managing Editor of the Cleveland Jewish News and the Columbus Jewish News. First, I would like to thank Harriet Rosenberg-Mann, Richard Berkowitz, Shani Kadis, Rabbi Hal Rudin-Luria, and the entire team here at B'nai Yeshurun Congregation for presenting this Shavuot program this year and asking the Cleveland Jewish News to be part of it. I'm honored to be representing the CJN. This past year has been a challenging one for everyone due to COVID-19. Every synagogue, every organization, and every business around the world has been impacted. It has been an extremely difficult year for the Cleveland Jewish News as well. I want to thank everyone for all their support during this year that allowed us to do what we did throughout the whole year. Without you, we could not have been successful. In the next few minutes, I will focus on how the Cleveland Jewish News engaged the community and grew audience during the COVID-19 pandemic. We learned much about ourselves. Some of the things that came to the forefront. Like many of you, we discovered we were able to work remotely. If we didn't know it before, we became an even more vital news organization covering Northeast Ohio, and not just the Jewish community. If we weren't sure before the pandemic that you, our loyal readers and our loyal advertisers, want a Cleveland Jewish News every Friday, we know it now. And we found out how blessed we are in this community to have such great community partners and community foundations that stepped up to ensure that the Cleveland Jewish News would be published every week. So where do I begin? I always like to start presentations by discussing a little about my profession, the newspaper business. I share some background, and this hopefully provides the context of what the Cleveland Jewish News was able to accomplish during 2020, our year of COVID. The newspaper business has been struggling for decades. There's no doubt about it. Hundreds of newspapers, weeklies and daily newspapers, have gone away. Those that have survived and even thrived have been extremely fortunate. We know that. We all recognize that, and every day we try to do better than we did yesterday. We also try to become more vital each and every day. There's no doubt the pandemic accelerated the demise of many newspapers across this country. Our friends in the Jewish media world and our colleagues in the secular media world were not exempt from challenges during COVID. Their unfortunate stories make what the CJN was able to accomplish even more impressive. Here's just a sampling of what happened to some of the publications in the Jewish media world. The venerable Canadian Jewish News, the largest Jewish publication in Canada, closed its doors after 60 years. So too did the Boston Jewish Advocate, this time after 118 years. The New York Jewish Week, one of the larger regional Jewish publications, permanently ceased operations for print in favor of an online model that they are developing. The Jewish Journal of California, another large regional publication, also transitioned to an online-only product after 40 years of printing a weekly newspaper. And the St. Louis Jewish Light temporarily suspended its weekly print publication in favor of a reduced publication schedule with much fewer pages. The secular world was touched as well. There are just too many weekly and daily newspapers to discuss that shuttered during the pandemic. Many others that are still around today, they in no shape, way, or form resemble their former selves. Many newspapers now print fewer pages, they have a reduced print schedule, they have reduced staff, they share resources, and they implemented other cost-cutting measures to stay alive. In fact, last month, one weekly newspaper in Kansas published a blank front page, no stories, no photos, no words. And on the inside, it said, this is what your paper could look like and your town could look like if there is no paper. There would be no news. Then on another page, it said that its major advertisers were no longer able to support that publication, and it too may be closing its doors in the upcoming weeks. The closing of these newspapers and others have left news deserts across the country, as they are called. And in other cities, such as Cleveland, the newspaper landscape was changing way before COVID even started, and it was not for the better. The Cleveland Jewish News was quick to recognize the changes that were on the forefront in Cleveland, and we took the opportunity to further engage the community and grow audience. So in early 2020, when COVID came to the U.S., Ohio, Northeast Ohio, and Cleveland, the CJN was ready, or as ready as we could be, to take these big steps to covering our community and increasing and improving our coverage. On Monday, March 9, 2020, the work world as we knew it at the CJN and many other places changed. But let me back up a few days before that. We had a team staff meeting to announce that we would be trying a one-day work at home, work remotely on that Monday, March 9th, to see how we would do, to see how successful we could be should we need to work from home for a longer period of time, sometime in 2020. We, like others, had no idea what was coming. We were told to take our laptops home. Then on Tuesday, March 10th, we would reassemble at the office, bring our laptops back, and debrief. What did we do right? What could we have done better? What do we need to do just in case we're going to be working from home? After that staff meeting, I told my editorial team that I had an inkling that we weren't coming back on Tuesday, and I suggested that they gather all their belongings that they need to work from home. And if I was wrong, they could bring everything back that Tuesday. As it is, we have not been back to the office since that Monday, March 9th, 2020. The first paper that we produced remotely was dated March 13. It was 72 pages, a good size for us. However, our next three papers all shrunk to 48 pages each, and that was due to the quick and immediate decline in advertising. And looking back today, just about 1 year later, the headlines, the photos, and the stories that appeared on page 1 in 3 issues in March told the ominous story of what we now know today that we did not realize when we were in the moment 1 year ago. Let's retrace our steps in history. Let's go back, March 13th, 2020. Our page 1 headline was in big letters, "Canceled, COVID-19 hits home." We had one story and one picture, and let me read a part of that story with you right now. As the outbreak of COVID-19 in Ohio moved into a new phase of community spread, March 11, one person in Cleveland's Jewish community and one who was visiting tested positive, sparking the self-quarantine of more than 19 local high school students. The first case known in Cuyahoga County on March 9th is an employee of the Jewish Education Center in Cleveland Heights, a man in his 50s who attended the APAC Policy Conference from March 1 to March 3 in Washington, D.C. He rode on the bus to the event from Cleveland. So, as we were putting that first COVID edition together, we asked ourselves, what could we do to inform and assist our readers, our community? How can we help them? How can they count on us as we, like everybody else, was learning about this new disease that had invaded this country? So we included a chart in one of our pages, and it listed preventive tips for the non-spread of COVID-19, this new disease that was an epidemic that became a pandemic. These tips, hand washing, hand sanitizing, covering your face, social distancing, all things we've been way too common with for more than the past year. How else can we cover the communities that we serve? Our reporters immediately went to work to find out how COVID was affecting businesses, synagogues, and other organizations. There were closures, and we were bringing that to the community as soon as we could. Our next paper, dated March 20th, again, one big photo, one story. That headline, "Our World Comes to a Halt." The photo that accompanied that story was a photo of hundreds of vehicles waiting in line for people in those vehicles to get COVID-19 testing at a location in Mayfield Heights. I went out to take that photo as well as many others that day, and it was a strange feeling for me. It was very eerie. I was sure to keep my distance and follow the protocols that I had just outlined, as did all the other reporters that were there. I watched as workers in the testing location were taking every precaution to remain safe as well, as were the people in the vehicles. Signage was everywhere, directing people to maintain safe and social distancing until it was their turn to come in line for a test. Typically, reporters would be allowed right up to the testing station. They would even be interviewing the workers. They might perhaps be interviewing the people in the car waiting for the COVID test. But on this day, it was a silence atmosphere and nobody was talking to anybody. Nobody knew what was coming in the next year. We also covered other stories in that issue. They included the cancellation of Shabbat services, almost something that is unheard of anywhere in the world. The Orthodox community responded quickly by having Shabbat minyans in houses and daily minyans in houses in certain neighborhoods. The Reform and conservative synagogues quickly started to think about their options. They became virtual. Who would have expected the word live stream to be such a household word today? We also talked about the bakeries and the restaurants that were trying to remain open and salvage some business, as the dining inside their restaurants were no longer allowed by the state of Ohio. Also, the state of Ohio would not allow visitors into nursing homes, and we talked to Menorah Park and Montefiore, our two Jewish nursing homes, to find out how they were keeping their residents safe and yet not allowing their families to visit. We also talked to the funeral homes as they were preparing to perform their jobs, and their jobs became ever so busy and ever so more important in 2020. We also told you about local food pantries and how they were stepping up to assist those in need. Our final paper in March 2020, March 27th, page one photo again. It was of the Ohio National Guard of Highland Hills coming to the Greater Cleveland Food Bank in Cleveland. That photo was accompanied by a headline, "Stay home, we're at war." Those were not our words. Those were the words of our governor, Mike DeWine. Stay home, we're at war. We also told you in that edition the story of the Jewish Federation of Cleveland and what it was doing to mobilize its resources to help our community. We also told you what shopping centers were doing as they were on reduced hours, as many residents avoided them for fear of the unknown. We also talked to families of those who were celebrating B'nai Mitzvah. What were those going to be like? Were they going to be in person, or were those now going to be virtual? Or were they even going to be postponed? We also made a key decision early on in the pandemic. That decision was to combine our Cleveland and our Columbus Jewish newspapers. In Cleveland, we have been publishing a paper almost weekly without exception since 1964. When we launched our Columbus Jewish News in August of 2018, that was launched as a bi-weekly, every other week, as they had been reading in that city. Due to the decline in advertising, this was a cost saving for the Cleveland Jewish News. We decided to publish one paper every other week, serving both cities. However, the following week, people went to their mailboxes in Cleveland and they missed the Cleveland Jewish News. It was not there. Even though we had outlined our plan and told people what we were doing, people were still surprised there was no Cleveland Jewish News in their mailbox. They didn't know what happened. Readers called to ask where their paper was. Even though we had explained this, they still did not understand it. They thought maybe we had become an online publication. Farthest thing from the truth. That didn't sit well with them, not receiving a paper. And it did not sit well with some community foundations and community organizations that stepped up and ensured that we were able now to print a Cleveland Jewish News every other week. So 1 week, everybody gets a Cleveland and Columbus Jewish News, and then the following week, everybody in Cleveland gets that Cleveland Jewish News that they've been accustomed to. Our last combined issue was April 3rd, Passover, almost 1 year ago to this day. That issue was a staggering 96 pages, showing the testament to the strength of our communities in both cities and what we were able to do. As virtual events started to become the norm in our community, our reporters began to cover these remotely from their houses. Screenshots started to replace action shots. Our in-person reporting was limited to a few outdoor Jewish events, mostly drive-by events, as organizations were trying to figure out how to continue to engage their communities. Social distancing was safely followed at these events. No matter how we covered these events during the pandemic, the community's thirst for information never waned. Then at the end of March and into the summer, our reporters found themselves in the community covering more than the typical Jewish community news. Our coverage took a new perspective, but no less important. As the country was outraged over the death of George Floyd of Minnesota on May 25th, protests and rallies were held around the country. We dispatched reporters to cover these protests and rallies in the Cleveland area. A rally in downtown Cleveland turned violent. We had a reporter walk the streets of downtown Cleveland the next day to provide horrific pictures and share the stories that our Jewish business owners who owned stores in downtown saw that night. We also spoke to some of them who described the devastation and destruction that occurred that night before. We also sent reporters to Black Lives Matter rally events and others that popped up in our communities. Reporters were in Beechwood, Chagrin Falls, Cleveland Heights, Shaker Heights, and elsewhere. Those events attracted hundreds to thousands of people, Jews and non-Jews alike, standing shoulder to shoulder to voice their anger and frustration at what happened in Minnesota and what was happening elsewhere around the country to black residents of this country. The CJN was there to share their stories. Then in June, we enjoyed a sliver of good news. Some Orthodox synagogues started to reopen those sanctuaries and allow their congregants to return inside, wearing face masks and socially distancing themselves. During that year, we also found ourselves covering the U.S. presidential election and the Israeli election. I should say the Israeli elections. There were more than one. As you can see, our coverage included all of the traditional stories that are typically found in a Jewish newspaper that we're used to sharing, but also more stories that may not typically appear in a Jewish newspaper. We also created many new features for our readers, and I will outline some of them now. We created an online calendar that listed virtual learning and exercise classes across Northeast Ohio. This became a valuable go-to resource for those in the community that were looking for that type of information. We also created e-newsletters, new newsletters to join the ones that we already had. We published hundreds and hundreds of stories about the pandemics online to keep you informed in real time. And we determined that 90% of our stories that we shared online never made print because they were dated and would have been too old by the time a printed newspaper came out. As a result of our increased coverage, we had more and more people in the community turning to CJN.org as their first source for news, or their primary source, or their only source for news. As we have done for years, we continue to cover news in the Jewish community and news that is important to the Jewish community. That's why we stayed on top of COVID-19 outbreaks in the classroom and openings and closings in public schools such as Beechwood, Cleveland Heights, University Heights, Solon, Orange, Shaker Heights, and other school districts. We had been averaging 500,000 page views per month, and during one specific month, we surpassed 1 million page views. 1 million page views for the Cleveland Jewish News, double of what we had averaged in previous months. Our number of unique users and number of sessions saw phenomenal increases as well. Our Facebook traffic and our Instagram traffic also showed significant increases. We sent dozens of breaking news alerts to keep our community informed in real time. As a result of providing this valuable service, we saw increases in the number of users online and subscribers in our newsletters and breaking news alerts as well. We also started to run in our neighborhoods stories about businesses that found themselves struggling in the hopes that we would be able to keep our readers to patronize them. We wanted to share what those businesses were doing to remain open. This was a way to help get out the word and support those local businesses. We also launched Good Deeds. We shared what the community, our neighbors, synagogues, and other organizations were performing to help those less fortunate. We also helped the restaurants further with free listings online and in print, Jewish-owned, non-Jewish-owned, kosher businesses, anyone that was offering carry-out service. We were updating this on a daily basis as people were requesting this service from us. We also created a local business section where businesses had a special advertising rate, and then they also were offered free advertorials to promote their business. All things that the Cleveland Jewish News was doing to give back to the community that had supported us for all these years. One of the hardest hit areas of our business was our magazines. Temporarily gone were J-Style, Weddings, Bar and Bat Mitzvah from the printed publication that you were customarily receiving. We were, however, able to transition some of those magazines to a digital-only product, and we also created a new magazine called Celebrations. And then we turned over a new page in our business. We entered the book publishing world. In partnership with Gray & Company, we published a novella by our arts and entertainment writer, Bob Abelman, and it was called All the World's a Stage Fright. We even produced a virtual event for Bob during COVID-19 where he led a panel discussion with other artists as a way for us to attempt to fill a void in the theatrical and entertainment world that was brought on by COVID-19. The Cleveland Jewish News's accomplishments did not go unnoticed. Editor and Publisher magazine, the trade Bible for more than 100 years, recognized the Cleveland Jewish News as one of 10 news publishers that do it right in 2021. What they said, here is quote, "When we put out the call for nominations for our 10 news publishers that do it right, it was right in the middle of a global health pandemic. Newsrooms around the world were dealing with difficult challenges, from the loss of advertising revenue to ensuring the health and safety of their staff. Obviously, newsrooms had a lot on their plates, and we were not even certain how many newsrooms would submit this year's contest nominations. Our 10 news publishers had to learn how to navigate a brand new world, whether it was providing and pivoting to virtual events to offer creative and innovative advertising packages to addressing the needs of their communities. They were able to find a silver lining during a tough season. Yes, we're still going through the pandemic, but after pulling through 2020, these new newsrooms are positive that the best is yet to come." That is how editor and publisher summed it up. I hope my remarks today provide some insight into how the Cleveland Jewish News engaged the community and grew audience during the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to thank everyone for watching.